All right. Well, greetings all. I'm Van,
And I'm Vivian.
and we are continuing on now with our study in Second Corinthians. And you were figuring this is what study
Number
number
12 in
12?
Second Corinthians.
Okay. So far we've spent more than 12 hours together just going through this second epistle of Paul to the Corinthians, and where we found out here in Second Corinthians 1:21 that the Corinthians also, not just the Ephesians, but the Corinthians also found out that the believer is sealed with the Holy Spirit of promise. So it's guaranteed. In other words, our salvation cannot be lost, as is often thought by some Christian denominations. But moving forward, our study is guided by a rightly divided understanding of the word, and that is so helpful in being able to not be confused by the scriptures. It is divided, and we'll point that out as we're going through. We use the King James Bible, which is the Bible that is appropriate for study. It's not just a reader's, help me go to sleep Bible, but it is a study Bible. And there is language in the King James Bible that sooner or later trips up everybody. It doesn't read the way we think it should read or the way we've heard. And I've come to accept that when I read something in the King James Bible and it doesn't really meet my expectations as to how it should be expressed, then I have decided that the problem is with me, with my understanding, and not with the text of the Bible, of the King James Bible. So I consider the King James Bible absolutely flawless in its presentation, its wording, the word order, the punctuation, everything. It's perfect and flawless. That's my sense of the Bible. So we use it as our text, and we use the Oxford English Dictionary for word definitions because, unlike other sources, most other sources for definitions, the Oxford will oftentimes help me to understand the word in the sense it was used at the time the translators, actually all the way back to Tyndale, Wycliffe, Miles Coverdale, when they were using these words and translating from the manuscript, Erasmus manuscript, to English, they had an understanding of words that is pretty well dropped from common day-to-day language. So the Oxford helps me to recapture that. And we thank Liz for the Oxford English Dictionary. Thank you, Liz. Okay, so we're moving on into chapter 11. And in chapter 11, where we're going to pick up where we left off, where we read our lead verse being, "No marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light." I would really like to explore this more, but we're not going to take the time in doing it. But Satan is transformed to an angel of light to this very day. There is light that is appearing that is actually has Satan behind it.
Mm.
Okay, so let's pick up where we left off. We were at verse 15, so we're going to just jump right into the continuing passage.
2 Corinthians chapter 11, starting at verse 16 through to verse 21. I say again, let no man think of me as me a fool. If otherwise, yet as a fool receive me, that I may boast myself a little. That which I speak it not after the Lord, but as it were foolishly, in this confidence of boasting. Seeing that many glory after the flesh, I will glory also. For ye suffer fools gladly, seeing ye yourselves are wise. For if ye suffer, for ye suffer, if a man bring you into bondage, if a man devour you, if a man take of you, if a man exalt himself, if a man smite you on the face. I speak as concerning reproach, as though we had been weak. Howbeit, whereinsoever any is bold, I speak foolishly, I am bold also.
Okay, so moving into verse 16, the A part of the verse, Paul says, I say again, let no man think me a fool. So when did he say this the first time? Well, that was at the beginning of the chapter where he asked the Corinthians, the saints and all the saints in Achaia, that that they would bear with him in my folly, and my folly being my foolishness, because as Paul is, what we're going to see here is that Paul is saying, I'm saying things and they are admittedly foolish. What you're and he's at the point he's trying to make is what they're saying about their suffering is foolish. So Paul is going to match them with his foolishness with respect to suffering. And in this portion of chapter 11, we'll see Paul compare the foolishness of what the Corinthians were taking. They actually were taking pride in, and then Paul is saying, well, if I'm going to take pride in my foolishness, let me give you my list. So it appeared foolish that Paul would have so much love for the Corinthians. They were so divided in their regard of him. They were really they were some that liked Apollos better, Peter better. They were very divided, and some even thought that Paul, they questioned him even being an apostle. So, if otherwise, he says in 16b, if otherwise, if you think me as a fool, he says, receive me as a fool, that I may boast myself a little. So he's going to boast foolishly against their foolish boasting. That's where we're going. So the saints in Corinth and Achaia, so Achaia is the area, Corinth being the city, might foolishly bear others. Now, Paul covered this in verse 4, and we saw this, if he that cometh. So we'll plumb that a little bit more in this portion of chapter 11. So there are those that were coming, and Paul says that he didn't want them to bear with these others that were coming and preaching foolish things. Now, today we can oftentimes spot somebody that's preaching foolishly, but not always. In fact, some come and their preaching sounds so reasonable, we are apt to receive it. To bear with he that cometh would be, and this is nothing to boast. They were actually boasting about those that would come and preach things that Paul considered wrong. Paul's this is his wry humor to the saints about boasting. He's boasting as a fool, so he's doing this actually somewhat sarcastically. This wry humor of his, I'm going to boast. You're boasting, well, I'll match your boasting. So he goes on to say in verses 17 and 18, that which I speak it not after the Lord. That is, this is not inspiration. He's saying, but as it were, foolishly, seeing in this confidence of boasting, see that many glory after the flesh, I will glory also. So this is just Paul trying to correct the Corinthians in terms of what they thought they would take pride in. So Paul goes through now a list. We're going to look at verses 19 to 20 of things that the Corinthians and all the saints in Achaia, what they bore. And he says these things are foolish in which to glory. So then Paul will offer a list of the things that he foolishly gloried. And again, it's like competing foolishness. He says in 2 Corinthians 10:17, but he that glorieth, let him glory in the Lord. So what we're seeing here again is Paul's efforts at correcting the thinking of the Corinthians in what they were taking pride in. All right, so he says in verses 19 to 21, for ye, number one, ye suffer fools gladly, seeing yourselves are wise. So he says, You think you're wise, and because you think you're wise, you're willing to suffer fools gladly. You indulge these fools. Ye suffer if a man bring you into bondage. Number two, then if a man devour you, you suffer that. Now, what is it for a man to be devoured? That is, for according to the OED, it's to deprive a person of substance by consuming it. So what the Corinthians were doing was they thought it they thought it wise to allow somebody to come to them as a, who knows, service, ministering to them, and then to literally deprive them of their own substance by consuming it themselves. And he goes on, if a man, number four, take of you. So first it was devour you. Now just is just take of you. Now, if a man, number five, exalt himself, that would be he lifts himself over you. He says, I'm more important than you are. You are to listen to me. You are to support me. You are to assist me wherever I need assistance. This is part of that being devoured. That these men would come in and exalt themselves over the Corinthians, and the Corinthians thought themselves wise to endure this. Now, and then this one gets me. If a man smite you on the face, they suffered that. So if this one that came into them would actually slap them or punch them around, they would endure that because they thought they were suffering for the cause of Christ. I speak as concerning reproach. And this word reproach is a matter of bringing disgrace. So he's saying, I'm speaking to your discredit as though we had been weak. Um, so Paul's not lifting them up. He's saying this is terrible stuff. Howbeit whereinsoever any is bold. So he now again, this is wry humor. This is sarcasm from Paul. He says, I speak foolish. If you think yourself bold, I'm also bold. So Paul considered it foolish to consider what they were suffering as being bold. Now, Paul's going to match them with this level of boldness and what Paul was able to suffer. So we have a list of 6 items here that Paul identifies that the Corinthians suffered. Now, verses 22 to 29, Paul offers what he suffered after first he gives his credentials, and then he's going to talk about what he suffered.
2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 22 through 24. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they the seed of Abraham? So am I. Are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. I am more. In labors more abundant, in stripes above measure, in prisons more frequent, in deaths oft. Of the Jews 5 times received I 40 stripes, save one. Thrice I was beaten with rods, once was I stoned. Thrice I suffered shipwreck, a night and a day I have been in the deep. In journeyings often, in perils of water, in perils of robbers, in perils by mine own countrymen, in perils by the heathen, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and painfulness, in watchings often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and nakedness. Besides those things that are without, that which cometh upon me daily, the care of all the churches. Who is weak, and I am not weak? Who is offended, and I burn not?
Okay. So uh, bear in mind now that what Paul is doing, he's comparing what he suffered to what the Corinthians took pride in suffering. So let's look at first, he starts off with his credentials, what he is in comparison, and continued to suffer. So even though he says, are they Hebrews? He says, so am I. I'm a Hebrew. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they the seed of Abraham? So am I. So this would be the comparison. This is Paul's lineage, and yet he suffered. Are they ministers of Christ? Now he says, I speak as a fool, because he doesn't consider them all appropriate to be ministers of Christ. They don't, all of them are divided in terms of what they think about Christ. There's no homogeneity in terms of their appreciation for who Christ is. They were very mixed. So
Brother
Paul's,
Van,
yes, Phil,
so this is an interesting list because it's identifying his audience.
it is.
They're
Yeah,
Hebrews. Some of them are actually more than Hebrews because they're circumcised, so they're Israelites. They have a
yes,
place in Israel.
yeah,
And then he's talking about the seed of Abraham. I'm not sure
yeah,
how it goes.
yeah,
But ministers of Christ, I like the way you bring this out because the answers to all these questions is yes.
yeah,
But the last one, the yes, is not really yes because they're not really ministering Christ. But
yes,
he's letting it be yes as a fool, not as a word from the Lord.
exactly.
These were the ones who were lording it over
Yeah, yeah.
Paul's converts.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to the extent that they would actually strike, they would smite somebody
Yes.
because they had exalted themselves and they thought
Mm-hmm.
they were so important, and there's a certain amount of this. We don't go around hitting each other anymore, but there's a certain amount of this exalting,
Yeah.
even within the church today,
Yeah.
an exalted elder, an
Mm-hmm.
exalted
Yes.
minister, and they lift themselves up.
Mm.
So Paul says, I speak as a fool. I am more. Paul says, I am more.
Mm.
So this, I speak as a fool. It is foolish to consider all the circumcision. It's foolish to consider all of the circumcision as being ministers of Christ.
Yeah.
So this is not, this is to catch, this is important to catch. Now, Paul goes on with his list. He says, in labors more abundant. So he worked more consistently, in stripes more above measure, in prisons more frequent, in deaths oft. Now, this is an interesting word, this word in deaths oft. So what are we saying? Did Paul frequently die? No, actually, the OED helped me understand this. Number five, the fifth sense about the word death. It's a figurative sense. It means to be cut off from civilian life. And Paul was frequently cut off from civilian life. All these other these Corinthian saints, the Achaean saints, they were not cut off frequently from civilian life. But Paul says, from civilian life, I was frequently deprived. I was cut off from it.
Paul was
Of the,
also cut off from being a Pharisee, right? His
yes,
status
Yes.
yeah,
was removed
yeah,
to death,
Yes.
in a sense.
He no longer had his identity with those
yeah,
who were of the flesh
yeah,
in Israel.
yeah. What we're reading here now, Paul is comparing what he
And,
suffered
and
and
endured.
endured compared to the Corinthian saints. So he goes on to say, of the Jews, 5 times I received 40 stripes, save one. So evidently, amongst Jews, the Orthodox, evidently 39 stripes was considered life-sparing and merciful. So he says 40 stripes, uh, less one, 39 stripes. Then he goes on to say that in verses 25 to 27, thrice or 3 times I was beaten with rods. So we only have record of one time at Philippi, Acts 16. Once I was stoned, and we have the record of that at Lystra, that's Acts 14. Then he says, thrice I suffered shipwreck. Well, it's actually 4 times counting Melita, but he had not been
Journey yet.
on that journey yet. So there are 3 times that Paul suffered shipwreck. We have no record of it. It's only the 4th time. A day and the night have I been in the deep. Again, we have no record of this. It was likely associated with one of these first three times that he suffered shipwreck. In journeyings, often, the word journeyings, that is engagement in battle. That's from the 16, that's the OED, points to this verse, and it says that this is in journeyings. The word journeying is another way to say an engagement in a battle. So Paul says that he was often engaged in battle.
It's an unusual definition for that word, isn't
Yeah,
it?
very. This that understanding of journeyings has completely dropped from the English
Mm.
language. That's why we need to look them up. Otherwise, I have no clue as to Paul is saying. Is he was he out for a
Man,
walk often?
man,
No. Yes, Neil.
would that imply that he was physically fighting people?
Wait till we get to the end of these slides. My last slide will say it all.
Okay.
So it is he was engaged in battle often. In now then we have in perils of water. Now the word peril is actually it's understood as being in eminently exposure to the chance of injury or loss or destruction. So this peril that is imminent danger of loss. So he says, in perils of water, in perils of robbers, in perils by mine own countrymen. Remember, he was a Hebrew, and he was in peril by his own countrymen, in perils by the heathen. So those would be those other than Hebrews, in perils in the city. There are certain cities now we can go into, and we're in peril. Paul was often in peril in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea. The list continues. In perils among false brethren. And there were false brethren. We'll read about that when we get to Galatians. In weariness and painfulness. So Paul suffered. He suffered in tiredness. We don't use the word weariness so much anymore. We just say I'm tired. He was weary and he suffered pain. So his body hurt. In watchings often, that is, he was vigilant. He needed to keep watching over things. In hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and nakedness. Besides those things that are without, so these are the things that Paul suffered, and you see it was a long list compared to what the Corinthians themselves thought, so proud of themselves that they were enduring, they were suffering. Paul says, besides all those things that I suffered, those things that are without, and when he says without, that is outside of the church, the body over which he was ministering. He says, that which cometh upon me daily. So he had this daily responsibility, the care of all the churches. So he suffered all those things, but yet he could not slack off on the care of all the churches. Now, notice this. He goes, now this is now with respect to, the focus is, the context now is daily care, the daily care of all the churches. Now, he says, with respect to the churches, who is weak? And I am not weak, question mark. So in other words, somebody within the churches, they're suffering weakness. Paul also is suffering weakness, but he has to, nonetheless, he has to put his weakness aside and care for all those in the churches. So Paul, though weak, would still care for those in the churches that were weak. Who is offended, and I burn not? So that's another question. Now, this matter of who is offended, who or one that is in the church over which Paul is now caring for, if they are offended, Paul says that he would burn. Paul would burn. In other words, we would say he would share the anger on behalf of any saint within the churches that he was caring for if when they were offended. Now, this is offended is not just saying something nasty to somebody. Today, I'm offended if somebody calls me a name, but this kind of offense would be a physical offense. So there would be those in the church who would be physically offended, and Paul would burn when he saw that happen. Okay, now we'll go to the last few verses of chapter 11.
2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 30 through 33. If I must needs glory, I will glory of the things which concern mine infirmities. The God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, which is blessed for evermore, knoweth that I lie not. In Damascus, the governor under Aretas the king kept the city of the Damascenes with a garrison, desirous to apprehend me. And through a window in a basket was I let down by the wall, and escaped his hands.
Okay, now this kind of seems like an odd group of verses for Paul to end this chapter on, but there's a point that he's going to make, and we won't know that point until we get to chapter 12, verse 1. So we have to read these verses, and then we have to go to chapter 12, verse 1 to find out what's Paul talking about. He says, if I must needs glory, I will glory of the things which concern mine infirmities. So Paul's infirmities were consistent with the work he had accepted of God. Now we say, well, how so? Well, Acts 9:16, we read,
Acts 9:16, for I will show him how great things he must suffer for my name's sake. And in Acts 9:15b, this is, of course, to Ananias, he is a chosen vessel unto me.
Okay, so Paul knew that because he had been chosen of God and accepted, he said, Lord, what must I do? What you will have me to do? And God had informed Ananias, and I suspect, Paul figured this out himself, that there were great things he must suffer. So it's connected. Paul then knew these things that he was suffering were consistent with the fact that he had been called of God. Now, in contrast, I suffer nothing. Paul goes on to say, the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, which is blessed forevermore, knoweth that I lie not. So all the things that he said, even though he doesn't attribute them to inspiration, he says, that everything that I've told you, I'm telling you the truth. Now he goes on and he says, in Damascus, the governor under Aretas, the king, so the king of the city, kept the city of the Damascenes with a garrison. That would be like the guard or the soldiers there in Damascus.
It was a walled city.
Yeah, yeah. So they were desirous to apprehend me. They wanted to arrest Paul. Now, and through a window in a basket was I let down by the wall, and escaped his hands. So we see this now. Paul, this is actually shared with us by Luke in Acts.
Acts chapter 9, verses 22 through 25. But Saul increased the more in strength, and confounded the Jews which dwelt at Damascus, proving that this is very Christ. And after that many days were fulfilled, the Jews took counsel to kill him. But their laying await was known of Saul. And the Jews watched the gates day and night to kill him. Then the disciples took him by night and let him down by the wall in a basket.
Okay, in a basket. He was let down the wall. So why did those in Damascus, why did the Jews there hate Paul so much? because he was proving to those in Damascus that Jesus was very Christ. So this is further evidence that the Jews, there were many, many Jews that absolutely would not receive Jesus as the Christ. And so consequently, because they hated him so much, they took counsel to kill him. And the disciples who believed that Jesus was the Christ let him down in a basket. And this pretty well is the only lesson that I had as a young lad in Sunday school, learning about this is all I knew about Paul. And I think it was I was sharing with Vivian. It was a flannel board lesson, and there was a basket on the flannel board, and the teacher showed me how Paul was let down the wall in a basket. So that was the limit of what I knew of Paul back when I was a youngster. All right, so let's move into chapter 12. Now, and the first verse of chapter 12 is going to complete the thought at the end of chapter 11. Our lead verse here, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh. And that's 2 Corinthians 12, 7b. And our journey today should take us to that verse before we end the study. Okay, so let's go on, and we'll read the first 4 verses of chapter 12.
2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 1 through 4. It is not expedient for me, doubtless, to glory. I will come to visions and revelations of the Lord. I knew a man in Christ above 14 years ago. Whether in the body I cannot tell, or whether out of the body I cannot tell, God knoweth. Such an one caught up to the third heaven. And I knew such a man, whether in the body or out of the body I cannot tell, God knoweth. How that he was caught up into paradise, and heard unspeakable words, which it is not lawful for a man to utter.
Okay, very interesting passage. Let's take a look at it. Now, chapter 12, verse 1, the A part of the verse, notice the A part of the verse ends with a period. So it's a complete thought. This complete thought contributes to understanding the end of chapter 11. He says, it is not expedient for me, doubtless, to glory. Now, what he's referring to is his escape from Damascus. This is the continuing thought, and it ends with a period. Now, we say, well, why does Paul say it is not expedient for me, doubtless, to glory? What an awkward phrase. Well, this is Old English, and there's a sense of the word expedient, which has pretty well dropped from common use in today's English. And that expedient is, I mean, we use expedient to say speedy or hasty, but it's not that expedient. It is the expedient which is fit and proper, so conducive to a definite purpose. That's the second category of senses of understanding for the word expedient. So the first category is hasty. The second is that which is fit and proper. So Paul is saying, it is not fit, it is not proper for me, doubtless, to glory. So with that, so this doubtless, that's an adverb, without a doubt or question. So today we would probably rephrase the words and to say pretty much the same thing. We would say, without a doubt, it is not fit for me to glory. And what he's talking about is his escape from Damascus. So he doesn't want to glory that he was successfully escaped from Damascus. They wanted to kill him. So he's pointing out he's not going to glory in that.
As well, he's not going to glory in what's coming up either.
Yes, exactly. So Paul is not glorying in these things. It would be natural for a man to want to glory. Hooray, I escaped them. No, Paul's not going to glory in that. So what he's doing here is he's connecting 2 Corinthians 11, 32, 33, that Paul escaped capture by Aretas, the king of Damascus. Paul was let down by the wall and escaped his hands. Paul says, I'm not going to glory about that. I'm not going to boast that I escaped. That's pretty odd. Paul
Van,
could have gloried. Yes, Neil.
just to jump in and sometimes I forget the context. When you're covering this kind of scripture passage, and I just reminded myself a moment ago that these Jews probably went to this king and
Yeah.
asked him to arrest Paul, who was
Yes.
Saul at the time, right?
Yes.
And so that they could kill him and get him out of the way because
He's a ringleader.
The sect of the Nazarenes now.
Yeah.
He's joined the other side.
That's what they're doing. They're going and they're getting dispensation to kill Paul.
Saul.
Saul.
Yeah. And the other part that's so important, I think, to remember is that these Jews, they had previous to his claiming that Jesus was the Christ, he was well known, I think, in the Jewish world as this persecutor of this sect of Nazarenes. And here he is, he's turned to the enemy, and now
Yes.
he's their main promoter. And that
Yeah.
probably incensed them 10 times over.
It's stunning. Paul's change is stunning. What he did, but he would not glory in it. He could have gloried in his escape, but Paul had decided it was not expedient. That is, it was not fit. It would not be proper for him to boast that he had escaped capture. So very little is taught in about Paul in Sunday school. This about is all I know about Paul growing up. Did you have a Sunday school lesson about Paul?
I think we did too, but they should have called him Saul then.
Yes, that's true.
They didn't know. They
Yeah.
didn't know.
Yeah.
Man,
Anybody have a Sunday
Van,
school
can I say
lesson
something?
about Saul escaping down the wall in a basket?
Van, can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
You know,
Yes, Dwayne.
Paul persecuted the church in his life, in his prideful life in the Jews' religion.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so he learned from that not to glory
Yes.
in the flesh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm writing a paper about that right now. So I just
Yeah.
thought I'd bring
Okay.
that out.
Yeah. Yeah. So Paul knew that God had said to him that he had a work to do and he was going to finish the work. So there was no point in him glorying, like as if he was being successful. He was not going to take credit for any of this. Okay, so let's move on.
Hey, Van, excuse me.
Yes.
I'm just wondering if this statement about, doubtless to glory, actually, he's referring to what he's about to express in the letter about the visions and revelations of the Lord. Because, I mean, it goes on to say in verse 5 and 6, he says, of such a one I will boast, of myself I will not boast.
Yes.
In verse 6, though I might desire to boast, I will not be a fool. So it seems to me it actually more ties into that which he's about to say, because it almost doesn't make a lot of sense about, escaping through a window by a basket. I mean, it makes more sense to me that, talking about one being caught.
Well, yes, and there are many that do. You're in good company, Ken, because there are many that do think that it is not expedient, like it is not proper for me to glory, refers to the fact that he was stoned and went up to the third heaven. But in terms of context and the fact that there's not that it ends with a period and not with a semicolon or a colon, because it's an end of thought. For myself, I've come to understand that this it's not expedient to glory. Points back to the fact that he escaped uh, capture. But you're in good company, Ken.
Well,
So
I
he
think
does
that
say then,
when
I
he
will come
originally
to, yeah.
when he
So,
originally wrote it, I mean, he didn't use a period. Um, so it could well, be a setup for something he was about to share with them. That's how I would see it anyways.
okay. Yeah, well, it's true. There wasn't a period in the original manuscript, but because I take the King James Bible as being flawless, I think the period is correct and it's telling me something. It's the end of a thought. And so now we have a new thought. And he says, I will come to visions and revelations of the Lord. So in other words, I'm changing topic. So Paul announces a change of topic, and he's announcing it by saying, "I will come to visions and revelations." It's brand new. Verses 2 through 10 concern visions, what Paul saw, and revelations, what was revealed to him. So what he saw was the third heaven, and what he experienced then was the thorn in the flesh. So I take the wording, I will come, to announce to me, the reader, that he's now switching focus. So then he's writing this now, and it's just a reminder. He's writing this back AD 60, approximately, where he says, now he's coming to visions and revelations. I knew a man in Christ above 14 years ago, whether in the body I cannot tell, or whether out of the body I cannot tell, God knoweth. So now what Paul is pointing to, he says above 14 years ago, and circa approximately AD 45, certain Jews from Antioch and Iconium persuaded the people of Lystra, other Jews, that is, to stone Paul in Lystra. And so this was the constant battle that Paul had, that there were these Jews that absolutely despised him for the message that he was preaching of very Christ. So it's interesting, he says, after he was stoned, and he was stoned dead. So there were Jews in the city that stoned him dead, and then those Jews drew Paul's body out of the city like a piece of garbage. You're dead, or drag you out of the city, dump you outside of the city. And while he was outside the city there were disciples. And when it says disciples, they were those that believed that Jesus is the Christ. They were disciples along with Peter and others of the apostles. They drew Paul's body out, and he rose up. The disciples saw this, and Paul came back into the city of Lystra, and the disciples observed that. That's all covered in Acts 14:19. So Paul writes, this happened 14 years ago. So Paul says above 14 years ago, this is when it happened, his stoning. And he was stoned dead. And the Jews knew when one was dead, because they would stone until the head was sufficiently crushed, that blood came out. So such a one was caught up to the third heaven. Now, Paul speaks about being caught up. Notice this. He says he was caught up. This one was caught up to the third heaven. So Paul has some knowledge about being caught up, where he says in 1 Thessalonians,
1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 17. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord.
Okay, so this matter of caught up, now Paul has spoken about this more than once. And in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, we read.
2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 8. We are confident, I say, and willing rather to be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord.
Okay, so when one dies at this time in this life, we are immediately in the presence of the Lord. That was Paul's experience. He was when he was caught up, he was with the Lord in the third heaven. Caught up to the third heaven, Paul says, I knew such a man, whether in the body or out of the body, I cannot tell, God knows. So it's interesting that Paul, and I would take then all those that have died since Paul and others of the body of Christ, those that have passed on from this life on earth, and they're in the heavenlies, they have no sense as to whether they are in or out of the body. God knows. How that he was caught up into paradise and heard unspeakable words which is not lawful for a man to utter. So here's this word, he was caught up into paradise. Now, paradise points to the third heaven. That's where Paul went. And he heard, so he heard things. What did he hear? Well, he heard unspeakable words. And from the OED, pointing to 2 Corinthians 12:4, it is that which may not be spoken. So Paul heard words which he has no authority to repeat. So he knew things that he was not authorized to share in Scripture. Paul wouldn't know if this was some other man. He wouldn't know these things because nobody else was. If this had happened to another man, that other man also couldn't speak of it. So then how would Paul know about it?
Exactly.
So it does point to Paul. Okay, let's look at verses 5 through 6.
2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 5 and 6. Of such an one will I glory, yet of myself I will not glory, but in mine infirmities. For though I would desire to glory, I shall not be a fool, for I will say the truth, but now I forbear. Lest any man should think of me above that which he seeth me to be, or that he heareth of me.
Okay, so Paul says, of such a one will I glory, yet of myself I will not glory. So this is consistent with how he, to my understanding, ended chapter 11. It's not expedient, it's not proper to glory. So Paul is not going to glory about this either. So this is why I take 1b to point to chapter 11, because now he's making another statement about not glorying, and that refers to this being caught up. Now, what's Paul going to glory in? He's going to glory in mine infirmities. Now, infirmities, Paul, we know he suffered many things, but we know this about him. His bodily presence was weak, and his speech was contemptible. That is, we understand the word contemptible to be, it was awful, it was despicable, it was difficult to listen to him.
Van, what about,
contemptible.
do you think the damage from being stoned would have affected his speech a bit?
It could be. It certainly affected his looks, and it could affect, I mean, everything. Because, I mean, to be stone dead, there are bones in the head that are being crushed by heavy rocks. So Paul was likely very disfigured. Paul goes on to say, for though I would desire to glory, I shall not be a fool. Paul says it would be foolish to glory, for I will say the truth. Now, Paul, what he's saying here, but now I forbear. I will say the truth. What happened to him was true, but he can't share it. So he says, if I were to tell you anything, I would have to tell you the truth. But now I forbear. Now, to forbear is to restrain oneself. And we know that that's how Coverdale used the word forbear, to restrain oneself. So Paul says, I shall not be a fool. I would say the truth. I will say the truth, but I can't. So I'm going to restrain myself. Lest that any man should think me above that which he seeth me to be. So Paul is admitting right here
Bodily presence.
That men saw him to be unimpressive physically. In fact, that's an overstatement. He was nothing to look at. So lest any man should think of me above what you see is what I am. I'm a smashed up man. His bodily presence was.
I'm sure the teachers that were coming in and trying to persuade them otherwise were quite eloquent,
Yes.
and they hadn't suffered like Paul.
And we're very susceptible to esteeming people based on looks, are we not? We see somebody that looks like they might be important, and we esteem them. So, and then you put a uniform on them, and we esteem them even more, or maybe less in these days. Who knows? Okay, so what he seeth me to be, that's his bodily presence, or that he heareth of me. So his speech was contemptible. His bodily presence was
Weak.
very weak. And we may be, even though Paul will be glorified in physical presence, we may be a little surprised when we meet him physically. Okay, let's move on now to verses 7 to 10.
2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 7 through 10. And lest I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of the revelations, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, the messenger of Satan, to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure. For this thing I besought the Lord thrice, that it might depart from me. And he said unto me, My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecutions, in distresses for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then am I strong.
All right. So we're only going to get through verse 7, and we'll save the rest for the next study. And what Paul says here, and lest I should be exalted, that is to be lifted up, above measure through the abundance of the revelations, there was given to me now notice this, a thorn in the flesh. Now, interesting that the phrase "a thorn in the flesh" is referred to in the OED, and it says, and it's in sense number 2, figuratively, a thorn in the flesh is a source of constant affliction. Notice that, constant affliction. That's the 1611 Bible, our King James Bible, pointing to 2 Corinthians 12:7. A source of constant affliction. So then we ask the question, what was Paul's thorn in the flesh? And this has been tossed around and debated by biblical scholarship and expositors since the time of Matthew Henry, if not even before the time of Matthew Henry. Let me just share with you a few words from Matthew Henry, what he says, because what Matthew Henry said now has been picked up by virtually every Bible expositor, everybody in scholarship, because when they go to seminary, they need to become thoroughly familiar with what Matthew Henry taught. So what Matthew Henry said about chapter 12, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, of this verse, he says, the apostle, and I'm quoting now from Matthew Henry's commentary, the apostle was pained with a thorn in the flesh and buffeted with a messenger of Satan. Then he goes on to say, we are much in the dark as to what this was. Some think it was an acute bodily pain or sickness. This is certain that what the apostle calls a thorn in the flesh was for a time very grievous for him. So that was Paul's, or rather Matthew Henry's assessment. Now, he used a word that was a little bit different. He used a word, he said that Paul was buffeted with a messenger of Satan. But that's not actually what the text reads. Paul says, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh. So what was Paul's thorn in the flesh? The text will actually tell us. It was the messenger of Satan to buffet me. Now notice this, it wasn't with, it was the messenger of Satan to buffet me. So we say, well, what is it to buffet? Well, buffet, the word buffet is to beat, is to strike, especially with the hand, to thump, to knock about. So what Paul is saying here, what I read is the messenger of Satan. That would be one, I would be a man, a Jew, or perhaps not a Jew, but likely a Jew. There was some man that was sent to buffet, to strike Paul, to beat him up, to thump him, to knock him about. And Paul was speaking the truth, and there would be this messenger that would come, and I don't know, but it could happen anytime during the day or the week that this person, this messenger, would come and would physically assault Paul, the messenger of Satan, to beat me, strike me with the hand, knock me about. So then we say, well, then why was Paul given a thorn in the flesh? And he was given a thorn in the flesh, lest I should be exalted above measure, lest Paul should be exalted above measure. So then what I learned from this verse 7, taking these words very literally, is that the thorn in the flesh was not some eye condition or some digestive problem or what have you, but there was a physical messenger of Satan, not a spiritual messenger, because a spirit doesn't have flesh and bones. So it was something with flesh and bone that could actually strike Paul. And who knows, but that it could happen at any time during the day or week, and this would have continued for him throughout his time. He would be buffeted. And he was in this buffeting, he would have to endure to prevent him from being exalted above measure. So that's what I take from 12:7.
Hi, can I just comment on that?
Go ahead, Liz.
Yeah, so it sounds like he wraps that up though in verse 10, where he says, therefore I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecutions, in distresses for Christ's sake. So these buffets were in the form of infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecutions, in distresses.
They were caused
Okay,
by
well,
others,
well,
weren't they?
yes, that's not how I take it, Liz. With all due respect, he says he's taking pleasure in these infirmities because they confirm that he's been called. Now, now infirmities, reproaches are not buffets. A buffet is a physical attack. Infirmities, reproaches, necessities, persecutions, those were things that he experienced in the course of being an apostle, but there was also sent to him a messenger of Satan to buffet him. And that actually now raises the bar to a whole new level as to what Paul actually needed to endure in his role as an apostle for the church, the body of Christ, the body over which
Can I
Christ
make a
is
comment
head.
also?
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's interesting when you hear the word exalted, that someone's exalted, it's typically coming from someone else, like outside of yourself. You were
Yeah.
exalted by others.
Yes.
But here I guess it's reading that Paul shouldn't exalt himself above measure,
Yeah.
due to the fact that he's had this gift, this wondrous, almost unheard of gift of the revelations, being called
Yeah.
up to the third heaven and so on. So
Yes.
that he wouldn't think too much of himself,
Yes.
that
Yes.
this messenger of Satan kind of knocked him back down to earth and said, "Hey, you've seen the third heaven. You know what's there. That makes you a very unique person, special in God's eyes. But guess
Yes.
what? You're not there yet, fully. And
Yeah.
here's a messenger of Satan to knock you about, just to remind you every whatever, however often, that you're
Yes.
still on the earth. You still got work to do. You still have to suffer for my sake."
Right. So Paul is comparing himself or actually his experience to the Corinthians, who were uh, they were exalting themselves that they had suffered certain things. They had suffered, and we covered 6 categories of things that they had suffered, and then Paul suffered much greater things,
More so.
much greater things, and so great that it is likely, in fact it is difficult for us to comprehend what in the world did that man go through, uh, and thinking that the devil, Satan, didn't want Paul to succeed, because every time Paul succeeded, a place in heavenly places would be taken away and given to a believer. And the devil, remember, his objective was to be possessor of heaven and earth. So here at the very beginning, the devil is watching and seeing places in the heavenlies escaping him, because there are people that are coming to believe Paul's gospel, they're being made righteous, and they're being seated in heavenly places. This is absolutely despised by the devil, and he would love to stop it, but he's not going to have success.
You know,
So that was, yes, go ahead.
sorry. Well, I'm just thinking of a saying that I've heard and I've used myself. Oh, this person's taking another shot at me. But that
Yes,
doesn't mean that they're hitting me physically.
yeah,
They can be doing it verbally, they can be very malicious about it.
yeah,
So just, thinking in the context of this particular passage, it's
yes,
possible too that Paul is using this word um, as a figure of speech.
yes. Yeah, and if you want to take it that way, it's fine. I have decided to take it very literally, that when Paul says a messenger of the messenger, not a messenger, but the messenger of Satan to buffet me.
Yeah,
So
yeah, no, fair enough. But also, I think if, we have to look at the fact too that if he's going to say a thorn in the flesh, are we going to take that figuratively too? Does he have an actual, or literally, does he have a thorn in the flesh? I think we just have to, for myself, I have to look at the whole context, the before
okay,
and
yeah,
the
so
later.
that's why I included the definition from the OED. So a thorn in the flesh, the OED amplifies it as a source of constant affliction. That's the OED. So a source of constant affliction would be the messenger striking Paul with the hand. Now, if you find that hard to say, how could that be? Um, At this point in what I've studied of Paul, it seems not just plausible to me, but it seems entirely consistent with what this man suffered, physically suffered, in terms of how much he was hated and how Jews wanted him dead. So it wasn't like he had a bad day or that he got sick with some food or whatever.
Right.
This was his existence, was a constant challenge to stay alive.
And we just got done reading it in the previous chapter.
Yes.
all the
Right.
things that he went through, the
Yeah.
perils in this and the perils in that, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, that was his thorn in the flesh in the previous a description of his thorn in the flesh in the previous chapter there.
Yeah. So
But
yeah, that wasn't his thorn in the flesh. That was just what he had to endure. And on top of all that, he had this thorn in the flesh, this the messenger of Satan to buffet him. So I can't even relate to this. This is just so outrageous
yeah,
that it's difficult for me to, and so consistent consequently scholarship. So if you can't relate to this, scholarship, biblical scholarship can't relate to this. The only thing they can relate to would be if Paul had some eye condition and he couldn't see very well, or
yeah,
some
yeah,
digestive problem, or what have you. I mean, they have to bring it down to
yeah.
something to which we can relate.
This
But
is this is
this
a
is
spiritual.
well beyond what Paul had to endure for the gospel of Christ, this gospel that makes the believer instantly fully righteous and able to be seated in heavenly places. I mean, that's a stunning thought. That's the last thing that that the devil wanted anybody to be successful with such a message. So he did everything that he could to stop Paul. And a little bit like how when Satan had approached God about Job and said, well, I can't get to Job because you put a hedge about him. So there are times when Satan has been allowed on an individual, and then God uses that occasion for instruction to all the Hebrews. Not to me. For me, this is wisdom, but this is instruction for all the Hebrews. So there are occasions where God has allowed Satan to do certain things to Hebrews that were being obedient to him.
Van, so
Yes. Yeah,
if
Phil.
yeah, just in terms of looking at the words, like a source of constant affliction, it wouldn't be he wouldn't be punched every minute of the day. You know what I mean? Like physically, if someone is hounding him and hitting him and saying things, there are things in within Paul too that he's being burdened with. Or when he talked about in verse 28 of chapter
Yeah.
11,
Yeah.
beside those things that are without, besides the physical things,
Yeah.
there's the within things on his heart, the things that are true, the things that are, qualitative, that are hounding him as well. Like he cares about the churches and things are happening. Like I think it's a constant affliction, physical and mental or spiritual, that
Okay.
he's
Well,
being.
you're in good company because that's exactly what scholarship thinks,
Oh,
and
there's also other
and
meanings
every
to
Bible
buffet.
expositor.
There's
Yeah.
But
also
what
other meanings to the word buffet as well. And one of the other meanings is to maltreat, to treat with violence, right?
what word are you referring? What word are you referring to?
Buffet,
Oh,
buffet.
Buffett.
Yeah,
Yes.
there's just other meanings to the word buffet other than to strike with the fist.
Yes. So number one is to beat, strike, especially with the hand. So
Very
there,
physical.
yeah.
Mm.
So you don't have to agree with me, and I never say that you should agree with me. What I'm saying is what I take from the text very literally was that there was a messenger of Satan
Correct.
who hounded Paul. He was
Yeah.
always around the corner. He was always within a moment of striking Paul. And if this sounds too impossible to you, then that's fine. But I have taken it that Paul was constantly hounded by a messenger of Satan who would, any moment he could, strike Paul physically with the hand.
I could
Now, if you
see
don't,
there being like an actual messenger, one person just by the word. Um, but I mean, would he have been striking him with the hand all the time? I'm not
But it
sure.
also says,
well, yeah, no, and that's fine. And I again, I don't think that you need to agree with me, not at all. but I will take occasion to say that I have elected to understand the thorn in the flesh as being something much more egregious, much more awful than I would of myself ever be inclined to think, or any Bible teacher I've heard. So every Bible teacher I've heard has always sort of dumbed it down to being something much more sufferable, and that's fine. Okay, I think we'll end the study here, and we will pick up next time with verse 8. For this thing I besought the Lord thrice that it might depart from me. So something is to depart from him. And that's where we'll pick up next time here in this 2 Corinthians chapter 12.